Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. So, we checked out Luton's 40K's Most Insane and Powerful Weapons Part 1. So, of course, today we gotta check out Part 2. Part 1 was, some of the stuff's pretty crazy. The whole, you know, what was it? The Mechanicus, like, there was some kind of Mechanicus ship that, I guess had some SDC technology, you know, from the dark age of technology built into it, and the machine spirit could come alive and shoot black holes and time dilation pulses that could reverse time in localized areas and do all kinds of crazy stuff. The Eldar with their void weapons, and the Blackstone fortresses, and all kinds of crazy stuff. But I do kind of agree with what he was talking about, where it seems like the chaos corruption is probably the most insidious, unpredictable, and hardest thing to really ward off and fight, you know? So I'm curious to see where part 2 is going to take us. So let's jump right into it here. See what we get.
Today's video is brought to you by Audible. There are many reasons why Audible is a great service, but most of all, it can save you a lot on the newest 40K.
I've got that book right there, Horus Rising. I haven't actually had time to sit down and start reading it yet. I'm actually kind of upset with myself. I had planned on at least having read through a few chapters and being able to get a video out on it this past week, but I've just been actually pretty busy. So hopefully this coming week I will be able to get to that. But yeah, I'm jumping right into the Horus Rising, Horus Heresy, you know, book story, which has like 50 plus books in there or something like that. So we got a journey.
K audiobooks. You can get a free audiobook of your choice plus 2 Audible originals using my link. Please be sure to check it out at audible.com/Luton.
Check them out.
At the end of the video, I'll cover some audiobook choices that I think you should give a listen to.
Do it. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. The green tide of Orkdom is upon us, and we are alone. There can be no mercy, no surrender. As we survive this day, it will be a miracle. Insane Weapons of the 40K Galaxy, Part 2. So I'm assuming we're getting into some orc stuff. And I mean, that was one of the questions that I had at the end of the last video. I believe it was near the end. But the idea of orcs having some kind of like super weapon, to me, is like, what would it be if they had any kind of super weapon? Because their whole purpose is to just fight. Like, that's all they want to do, is just fight. So, like, technically, they are themselves, like, a super weapon. Like, that's what they were built to do. So I would be interested to seeing more of what they have, and, you know, and along those lines. Maybe it's just some kind of giant, massive orc boy with all the DACA.
We return now to the world of insane weapons and powerful tools in the galaxy of the 41st millennium. However, within that I want to note that given just how many weapons are completely bonkers in the dark and far future, it seems likely this series will run on and on, and if you want to see that happen, hit the like as always. So as I say, the better a video does, the more I will make. As with the last time, I will just note briefly that for the purposes of these videos, I am considering a weapon to be anything that is simply destructive to an enemy, which can mean simply being powerfully advantageous to its user, not necessarily a literal and physically offensive object, device, or infantry weapon. It could simply be a concept or belief system. For example, as we learned last time with the corrupting nature of chaos, which was also illustrated in the Defense of Riser video, just how insidious and problematic chaos corruption can be, and that if nothing else it creates weakness within the enemy. This is why in the past many weapons were focused on wounding, not killing an enemy, so that it would burden your opposition with casualties. Right. And the key element is that whatever it is, it enables destruction. Lastly, I will say that you guys have made plenty of good suggestions last time around for more choices to cover. There is very obviously a huge wealth of weapons and different processes that rise to a level of being insanely powerful, so if it's not featured here, don't worry, I may well already be writing it up for the third installment, but you'll need to join me next time around to find out if it's featured.
Death strike missiles. That already sounds
today,
pretty
an
ominous.
Imperial weapon, and within the realms of some of the weapons we've been talking about, this may appear on the face of it to be something of a controversial choice, as
I wonder if these are some kind of like nuke-based weapons. You know, I'm just trying to think of what their technology would be. I mean, they've talked about, you know, virus bombing worlds, and that was like stuff from even in like the 30K. So that's like, I know technological advancement isn't really a thing right now. You know, it can be considered heresy. So I don't know how much real advancement they've had since, you know, listening to some of the stuff with the Horus heresy and virus bombing worlds and yada yada. So obviously they have, you know, biological weapons, chemical weapons, and obviously I would assume they have nuclear weapons. So I'm just trying to think of like death strike weapons. You know, I would assume it would be something along those lines of a chemical, nuclear, or biological weapon of, you know, mass destruction.
as I have selected the Astra Militarum Death Strike missiles. Now you may be saying, what? Just a missile? How is that insane or crazy and powerful? Well, hear me out. I would admit that Death Strike missiles will probably not stand out immediately as a crazy or a powerful weapon. However, it does have a solid dose of insanity about it, and we'll come to why shortly. The first great thing about Death Strikes is quite crudely that it has a truly epic name. When you're launching Death Strike missiles,
it does. It's a
you
very
really
ominous
know what
name.
you're going to be getting when you call these guys
Death.
in. The next reason for me is that the Imperial Guard don't catch many breaks, so for them having some awesome firepower in terms of long-range, very powerful ordnance is no doubt appreciated by those in the trenches. Lastly, and
Yeah, I think that's really what they're known for, like overwhelming horde numbers of just meat shield men, you know, that are protecting their artillery and you know, mechanized units. That's pretty much, from what I understand so far, is what the Imperial Guard's like main tactics are. You know, meat shield to hold the line, artillery and tanks barrage, and just wipe everything out. You know, maybe do some orbital bombardment before they drop pod people in. Maybe have some airstrikes. Basic military tactics from what it sounds like.
powerful ordnance is no doubt appreciated by those in the trenches. Lastly, and also probably most importantly, the reason I chose the Death Strike missiles is that the weapon is very representative of the upside-down, apathetic attitude towards human losses within the Imperium. The Death Strike is not a complex weapon. It has no temporal black hole firing archaeotech functionality. It's not harboring some latent AI or able to extinguish stars. It's simply a single huge intercontinental ballistic missile mounted on the body of an Imperial Guard Chimera to use as a mobile launching platform. It's pretty low tech. In fact, it's barely different than what we have now in the 21st century. You don't need a huge team to operate it because it's just a huge missile mounted on a transport.
And you don't necessarily need something to be super hyper advanced to be, you know, deadly like this. You know, nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons, dude. You know, they are there for mass destruction. And in the 40K universe, where you've got hordes of Tyranids or orcs that you gotta wipe out, you know, throwing some nukes at them is probably going to be one of the most efficient ways of clearing stuff.
Need a huge team to operate it because it's just a huge missile mounted on a transport. Once it's fired, the operators of said launch vehicles are going to either turn around and hightail it back for rearming or jump out and get into the fight. Either way though, they're going to be very soft targets for your enemy once they've delivered their payload, but considering they're likely to be quite likely out of sight of the action, that's probably a very minor consideration in the grand scheme of things. Regardless,
I would think working, being one of the you know, ground soldiers or whatever that are working one of the artillery platforms would probably be one of the better jobs for a guardsman, because you're in the back just shooting stuff. You're not seeing the front. You're just back there loading missiles, launching, loading missiles, launching. You know what I mean? So like, unless, you know, stuff really hits the fan and it gets bad, I would think, you know, as long as things going in your side's favor, it would be relatively safe. I know that's kind of a questionable term, phrasing, whatever you want to say for the 40K universe, but I would think, you know, at least the death rate for people working, you know, artilleries, batteries, etc., missile launchers, wouldn't be as bad as obviously being a frontline grunt with a lasgun.
Sight of the action, that's probably a very minor consideration in the grand scheme of things. Regardless, who really cares about Johnny Guardsman driving his tank? We want to know more about Commissar Notley overviewing his gigantic barrage of Deathstrike missiles raining down on the waves of heretics and Xenos who dared to invade Imperial territory. Now you might still be thinking, well, that doesn't seem very insane. On the face of it, I'd agree. However, its functionality and even its lethality is not what I love about the Deathstrike. Yes, it can fire over absolutely massive distances, which makes sense as it's basically just...
So, I mean, it looks like there's 3 different missiles. It looks like there's 2 smaller and 1 big one. I'm assuming that those are just different payloads of missiles that it can launch. You know, one big boy to like really wipe everything out, and then just maybe 2 smaller ones for maybe more precision clearing of areas, I would assume. You know, let me know.
The Deathstrike. Yes, it can fire over absolutely massive distances, which makes sense as it's basically just a rocket with an immensely powerful warhead. But this is where we need to come to one of my favourite parts of the Imperium, its comically bleak levels of apathetic bureaucracy. Just what I mean by this is that there will generally speaking be minimal attention paid to the thousands of guardsmen being turned into meat paste by alien horrors. There may well be some forms filled out, but that's about it. Yet the Deathstrike is considered to be such a powerful weapon that it requires all manner of special authorization from the Militarum to be deployed. And because the administrative process required to make literal craters out of its enemies, even little if any remains, is in fact considerable, I always like to imagine an Adeptus Administratum logistics representative asking an officer at some forward base on a besieged planet, "Are you really sure those death strikes are needed, sir? Because I'm going to have to fill out a whole set of new forms for you to plus," asking the Mechanicus and Ecclesiarchy to arrange their whole series of ceremonies. The insane part of a Deathstrike is less what it does and more the hoops that have to be jumped through just for them to be deployed. Deathstrike.
That honestly is kind of interesting that there's so much red tape behind having to deploy one of these things in a universe, world situation, whatever you want to call it, where like things like that seem very necessary when you're dealing with hordes and hordes and hordes of Tyranids and Orcs. You know, and Eldar with their advanced technology and stuff like that, and, you know, possibly Necron. Not to mention, you know, Chaos Demon incursions. I would think nuke and stuff would be, like, almost baseline, like, tactics. You know what I mean?
It does, and more the hoops that have to be jumped through just for them to be deployed. Deathstrikes can be outfitted with a whole range of payloads, from plasma to biological, even vortex-tipped. So like many powerful weapons in the...
Yeah, like I said, you know, chemical, biological, he said even plasma and vortex stuff, so...
Imperium, they can end up becoming viewed in many respects as some kind of holy weapon. Consequently, their authorization and deployment is tied up by red tape and weighed down under paperwork and ceremonial process. For something more advanced like a Baneblade or a Titan, you could perhaps forgive such long-form procedures, but for the Deathstrike, come on Imperium, to even get Deathstrike missiles to a battlefield requires an extensive process before they can be rolled out, which stands in stark contrast to, say, battalions of Imperial Guard, where instead of having to check off all the boxes before moving on to scented oil ceremonies, you're more likely to be asked, "Really, sir? Are you sure you only want 50,000 guardsmen? Because, you know, we can give you another 100,000 men if you really need it. It's not a problem. I don't know why you wouldn't take those extra guardsmen. You know, they're just waiting to be thrown against the enemy. So rubber stamp it and you're good to go." The Deathstrike missiles are comically perfect metaphor for much of the Imperium for me, because they sit on this farcical line between being powerful and very pertinent tools for the Imperial Guard, but are also then completely hamstrung by bureaucracy, making them not
it is very
practical.
ironic.
Meanwhile, thousands of guardsmen are being literally shredded in real time by their enemies, but hey,
it's very ironic that it's a tool that could be used very effectively against an enemy, especially hordes of enemies, but because of bureaucracy, it's, you know, held back and probably causes more damage to the Imperium than not that way.
Meanwhile, thousands of guardsmen are being literally shredded in real time by their enemies, but hey, it's the Imperium, so you can always deploy more guardsmen. A single missile, on the other hand, turned out by Imperial Factorums. Now hold on, that quite obviously needs considerably more scented oils and ecclesiastical readings before we can even get to thinking about rolling them out from the armory. Anything else would just be complete blasphemy. Of course, when the Death Strike does bring its firepower to the battlefield, it can be truly apocalyptic, razing cities, bunkers, Xenos hordes, traitors, or insurgent encampments. They could be used defensively by Imperials upon besieged worlds, or offensively in supporting an assaulting force launched ahead of infantry to help secure strategic territory and resources. Their range and power is so vast that their targets are likely not even going to be aware an enemy force may be headed their way before they suffer catastrophic casualties as if struck down by the very hand of the Emperor. Judgment rained down upon them in fiery destruction by the Death Strike missile. Hoping though, of course, that they've managed to even be deployed before the majority of the Imperial forces are obliterated.
Good start, you know, good start. Basic, you know, nuclear, biological, chemical, you know, weapons of mass destruction. You know, that's kind of like basically the super weapons that we have now, and they're effective for a reason, you know, so there's no reason why they wouldn't be effective in the 40K universe, unless, of course, you know, like the Eldar might have technologies that could counteract, you know, they might have radiation shields or something like that that could counteract, you know, certain levels of blasts and heat, you know, things like that, things that could absorb a lot of the blasts and the heat and the actual radiation that are done, or things that could make them immune to certain chemical agents. Like I believe the Tyranids are almost, you know, immune to any kind of biological or chemical attacks. So, you know, you would probably have to just like straight up nuke them in general, but maybe they even have some kind of evolution that's made them resistant to a lot of that kind of stuff too, you know, I don't know. But, you know, nukes are nukes. They work.
But now we return to
Necron
more
Aeonic
diabolical
Orbs.
Xenos Necron technology.
Interesting.
And comparative to my first
Never heard of these, so I'm very curious what this stuff
one
is.
is genuinely controversial, and that will become clear why. But it also ignites one of my worst fears in the form of yet another attack of the 40k unpronounceables because of their use of the odd AE symbol. I am fairly past the point of caring now when it comes to 40k pronunciations. I'm just done with it because some of the names of characters of things start to feel ever more like being weird just for the sake of it. I'm just going with what appears the easiest, Aeonic. And that's what I'm going with, and that's how I will always say that. The reason being, I did find another use of this in 40k, and it was also to pronounce the word ether. Anyway, what is this strange Necron object and what does it do? Well, first, and I know how you all love this, I have a solid preamble to get through because I need to note fairly importantly that this is a very questionable object in the sense of, is it actually even being a thing or not? So trust me, we do need to know a little bit more about the background of its emergence before I even describe what it is. However, I did decide to add in this note here. If you cannot be bothered to hear me talking about how this thing came to be, I have timestamped this video, so you can either check in the timeline below the video or in the notes, and skip over to the next section. The Aeonic Orb has never had an official model created for it, for starters. Now, for many of you, that may not matter. There are, of course, plenty of other things within the background of 40k that have no actual model. But as I said, it's tricky to really know if this Necron artifact is...
So, it's an artifact, but it has no actual model. So is this something that's used? I would assume then that means this isn't something that's used in the tabletop, and this is just something story lore based that has been talked about, happen in certain battles, etc., etc.
Is actually considered a genuine thing, or if it was just a flight of fancy as an idea, because it also doesn't really appear in any narrative material either. It was basically more of a concept, but it was a little more than that, as I will explain. Personally, I enjoy the often very confusing and chaotic nature of 40k. It's something that feels like an unending puzzle with leads chasing off in different directions. It can be very...
Also, you know, with him talking about that, it kind of feels more real that way. You know, it feels, I guess, more believable, I should say. Because, like, there's a lot of times in stories and things like that where like certain things are all knowing and all powerful and like perfect, and like even like the gods in the 40K universe, like everything's flawed. And there are no real good guys or bad guys. It's just basically people, races, species, you know, acting from their point of view for their own betterment. The Tyranids aren't evil. They're just consuming and evolving because that's what they do. The orcs aren't evil. They just like to fight and kill because that's what they were created to do. You know? Humanity's not evil, but in the situation that they're currently in, a lot of bad stuff has to happen or is happening, and a lot of people are having to sacrifice a lot of things for the betterment of humanity because of the dark position humanity is currently in. You know, I mean, like, the Emperor is on, not many people know this, obviously, but the Emperor is, like, on death's doorstep, so, I mean, if he dies, warp travel's gone, and, you know, Earth is then susceptible to hordes of chaos demons just flooding it, and then, you know, who knows what's gonna happen to humanity at that point, etc., etc., etc. So, I mean, it's like, there's no real, you know, evil, it's just, you know, races, species, beings, whatever, acting from what from their perspective, what they have to do from their perspective point of view, whatever, what they have to do to survive. And it's that, to me, makes things more interesting and feeling of realistic, because that's kind of really what the reality of life is. There's not necessarily really good or evil. It's different points of view and different belief systems and how you view things from that. So that's one of the things that I really like about the 40K universe.
Okay, it's something that feels like an unending puzzle with leads chasing off in different directions. It can be very contradictory at times, where all you can do is try to discern your best guess as to just how things really are. It's actually an intentional part of the design of 40K as well, but I actually find this to be quite refreshing. There are a great deal as well of peripheral details, often very vague at the best of times, and as I've said before, my overall view is that how true or untrue something is depends mostly on how collectively well defined it is. It's much more about that than it is somebody simply just stating that a thing occurred or existed. And this is why, despite in some of the newer books, new material, dropping potentially very big revelations, I'm very wary about believing it being set in stone, because you just hear it from one person. And when you're in an entire galaxy and all you have is one person's account, how much do you trust it? What's their motivation? What's their history, their overall goals? What's their faction? My overall methodology is that within 40K, the more discussed and the more documented something is, again, perhaps cross-factionally as well, the more likely you can consider it to be objectively true. But even then, there's a lot of room for doubt. What if something is widely documented in a faction, but its origins were distorted to deliberately sow confusion, thus projecting or distorting events outside of our field of view? So it is a complex and troubling thing, but it is also part of 40K nonetheless. And as much as we might like things to be very neat and tidy, all squared away with proper labels and dates and above all certainty, it just doesn't work that way in 40K. And I know that bothers some people, but it is simply how it is. Now, specifically when it comes to the Ionic Orb, I want to be absolutely clear. This was never something included in an official 40K book. So you're probably by now already gathering wood to start lighting the inquisitional fires at my feet. But hold on, although it was never included in an official book, the Ionic Orb was displayed on the Specialist Games site run by Games Workshop. What the hell is that? Well, it doesn't exist anymore, but you see, quite a few years ago, Games Workshop had a lot of its older material for spin-off games like Necromunda, Battlefleet Gothic, and Epic. In fact, I seem to remember that when Necromunda stopped being officially supported, Games Workshop actually had the whole rulebook freely available to download. But this site also had other oddities and sort of house rules to add interest and flavour to these spin-off titles. Even though they weren't being officially supported, they wanted to sort of add something, I guess, for the community back then. So that's really what this Specialist Games site was, and I believe it was most prominently active in the early 2000s up to about 2006, but I'll admit it's not something I paid super close attention to, so maybe somebody can tell differently or I'm just wrong, but that was my understanding. Either way, the Specialist Games site definitely had some sort.
So it sounds like this was an idea that was going to be used for something and then potentially was scrapped, it was going to be used in a game, or yeah, some kind of spin-off story or something like that, but never actually really got used. But there was lore made from it, you know. I don't know.
Sort of connection to what would be considered official material because it was part of Games Workshop's online presence at the time. But I would judge it to
Necrons are so cool looking, man. I mean, look at these little minis and whatnot, dude. Those look dope.
be basically anyone's individual call as to whether you would actually consider it being truly a part of what we would ostensibly define as the actual 40k version.
On a side here, man, I really hope, like, I've said this before in some of my other videos, the Total War franchise, the Total War Warhammer franchise is amazing. I love it. I think it's one of the best, you know, overall strategy games that's out right now. I would love to see, when they're done with it, if they to somehow do a 40k version. It would be a lot more complicated, I think, a lot more expansive, obviously, you know, with how they would have to do the galaxy and whatnot. They would obviously have to add naval battles and do them right, because we're in space, and you know, warp travel, and that would be interesting, you know, possibly having chaos incursions as you're traveling through the warp or the webway, or what, I don't know, whatever. It would be awesome if they could do it and do it right. I would love to see it. I would love to see it. I would love to see a really good grand strategy game like that in the 40k universe with a good story. And you could play all the factions like you can in Warhammer Fantasy. That would be dope.
Verse. It would, of course, close when things were steadily revamped. Later, some games like Necromunda, of course, relaunched as completely refreshed products. However, games like Epic and Battlefleet Gothic continued to not have new tabletop versions of those games released, but it is my fairly confident guesstimation that it is fairly inevitable they will do, but just so far not yet. Now, although no longer officially supported by Games Workshop, there was still a solid group of people who wanted to enjoy and still have access to these unsupported titles. And this is where you see websites providing unofficial but community accepted army lists for units and so on, to give everybody a stable field to work off of. What I want to note is that although they are unofficial, these sources are usually confined to just doing the rules and unit stats. They're not just creating random background details. You know, this can occur, but most of the time that's not what it is. It's just about rules and stats. And I wanted to clarify that because in terms of the Aeonic Orb, as I noted earlier, it had no official model produced or official background produced. But even though it never had a specific model created for it, it did originate from the specialist game site produced by GW. Now, I know this was a lot of preamble blur, but I'm...
Right, so a long history and a lot of talking around of something that apparently did exist at one point in time, but it seems like a scrapped idea, essentially, is what he's going on to. But it was at one point in time something that was officially going to be made, announced, whatever, used by Games Workshop themselves. So at one point it was canon, but it seems to have been scrapped. I believe that's what he's getting at.
Sorry for that, but it is important and relevant because the Necron Aeonic Orb is a very unusual oddity. It's sort of official and sort of unofficial. It hasn't been officially, and I'll say it, retconned, because it originated from a time when Games Workshop were trying to provide extra detail for specialist game communities. Nothing has since overwritten or superseded it, but if you were to look at the original descriptions of it now, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was a completely unofficial thing. In fact, that's even what I thought when I first was reading about this. Now, I can't imagine we'll see something like this happen again because it's such a weird, specific oddity happening toward the retirement of one title and before things were even getting formalized in terms of just what material was provided where, really. It was very scrappy and weird, but this kind of extra game support did set up for supplements that would follow on right through to now where we are, when we're seeing things like Psychic Awakening in 40k providing individual units to accompany the specific narratives. Maybe I could have just skipped all of that and just said it's like how Psychic Awakening was and how they had specific units with that, but for the old Epic game system, and then you wouldn't have had to listen to me ramble through it all. Oh well. So, what is the
But content?
Orb? It was created long ago as an expression of ultimate power. The Aeonic Orb is the epitome of Necron technology and a testament to the might of the Catan. In essence, the orb is a fragment of a star contained within a necrodermis sphere, stabilized by the awesome power of Necron magnetic technology. This containment system gives the orb its primary power source. The orb itself is mounted on a massive skimming platform that gives the orb its mobility. Aeonic orbs were rare even at the zenith of the Necron's empire, and the Aeonic orb is probably the rarest Necron weapon in the current period of the galaxy. Their rarity is in part due to the fact that they are no longer able to be created by the Necron, because in order to do so, a Catan was required to destroy an entire star to shackle the power of the star for the use by the Necron.
Gotcha, and now that they've enslaved the Catan, they can't do that anymore. Okay, interesting. So, I mean, what does it do, really? Because essentially it sounds like they've contained the star down and compressed it down into, like, an orb of some sort. So, I mean, like, that could have potentially all kinds of uses, you know? It could be, like, power generation, you know? Having a star that you could put, like, in a battery form in something, and then, like, that could power all kinds of things, you know? All kinds of weapons, defenses, whatever, shields, you know, whatever you can think of. You could also just, like, throw it and unleash it, and bam, you got a star, you know? That could all of a sudden be there, and who knows, they could even, you know, have it in a state where the star's ready to collapse, and it could just be like a black hole grenade that literally just, like, boom, black hole. Or they could have a star that's ready to go supernova, and boom, you have a supernova bomb, you know? All kinds of potential things. So I'm curious what actually this does. It could have multiple uses, like I said. It could power things, or you know, potentially just be used as actual things of destruction, you know?
Its power is on a scale that would be described as titanic weaponry, because when one is observed by a Necron army, it's almost always to eliminate enemy titans, although it is unlikely an enemy of the Necron have ever actually seen an Aeonic orb, because they would have no idea of what was about to come their way, and know that if they did see one, immediate and urgent fleeing should be the best course of action. In some respects, the Aeonic Orb is quite simple. It's this star fragment constrained within the Necrodermis shielding, unleashing the power of solar flares against its enemy. And this is achieved by adjustment of its containment fields surrounding this star fragment. It focuses a concentrated plume of plasma generated by the stellar fragment into a high velocity bolt. It's so powerful that the plasma suffers no loss of heat or velocity, and horrifically this allows the Necrons to direct a plasma beam of focused solar energy. It's able to cut through virtually any material without resistance. Titans have reported as having suffered catastrophic damage when engaged by Necron Aeonic orbs, and despite having the most powerful shielding in the Imperium, they were unable to withstand the sheer power of a focused stellar beam. However, the weapon is not without its limitations. Forming the containment beam is so energy intensive that the orb requires significant periods of time to recover from firing. To that end, the Aeonic beam has another option that is weaker but similar in concept to this solar flare, and it's known as a solar burst. It is a much weaker containment beam used to guide a mass of plasma to a target, which results in the plasma losing heat at an incredible rate. So by the time it reaches its target, its effects, while powerful, are not comparable to the main solar flare beam. Its range is considerably more limited, but despite this,
Getting Dragon Ball Z here, man. Krillin's able to do that by himself, you know? I mean, damn.
To the main solar flare beam. Its range is considerably more limited, but despite this, the explosive force and radiation unleashed upon its targets is still sufficient to cause havoc among its victims. The Necron and Eldar have dabbled in some of the most end-of-days weaponry, and the Aeonic Orb is no exception. The Necron were able to shatter the Catan, being so powerful that they could literally distort causality, and the Necron in defeating them unleashed all manner of strange effects. It seems in fact that the Necron have a very far and much deeper understanding of the galaxy and the forces at play than many would consider them capable of, or hope they were capable of, and that for their appearance as ghoulish metallic legions of destruction, they are in some respects far more refined and cautious in their curating of the precise forces at work in the galaxy. To this end, they have what are known as the Cryptex, who specialise in the highly advanced fields of technology and knowledge. Among them are also what are known as Chronomancers, who have a deep understanding of time, causality, and even able to bend time to their will. The overall point here is that much of what the Necron find themselves focused on bears little consideration for mortal races, but they do understand that there are some powers so dangerous that even they must utilise caution and restraint. lest they unleash powers or chains of events so powerful that nothing can contain them, leading to the annihilation of all things. It appears likely that it was their ability to wield powers strong enough to enable the destruction of the Catan that brought them to this realization. But the bottom line is that the Ionic Orb probably...
Well, also probably just seeing the Catan and the Old Ones fighting in their fight with the Old Ones and the power that those two, races had. That's power even greater than what they currently have, I believe. So seeing that firsthand, the beings that created life on, various planets throughout the universe, galaxy, whatever, fighting other beings of, like Galactus versus, other celestial entities kind of a situation is like the best comparison I can think of in my mind. Celestials versus, whatever. Other reality potentially distorting, creating whatever beings. So, like, it's understandable that them having that understanding of how these great powers can affect the universe and how even sometimes in the short term things that could benefit them in the long term would hinder them play out. It would also make them kind of hard to predict, I would think, in battle, because what you would see as like maybe them surrendering or giving up a certain thing or taking a position that doesn't seem strategic right now, later on in the bigger picture that they see will have an effect that benefits them, but it's in a way that you don't necessarily understand or see. They're like master chess, players, they're seeing things, 10, 20, 30 steps ahead kind of a situation.
Probably does lean slightly more toward unofficial than official, and I could have chosen not to include it, except for one reason, which is that it does fit completely within the sphere of what we know the Necron to be capable of and what we would expect the Necron to deploy to the battlefield. It's a very well crafted device in terms of fitting within the background, and in some ways it's actually not even as powerful as some of their other technology. I mean, please do remember that one of the Necron's fully official weapons was basically a Death Star mobile tomb world armed with Gauss weapons that could literally scorch, disintegrate and turn to sterile ash the surface of any planet it encountered. Those vast platforms also had powerful gravitic wave energy which could tear apart enemy ships, as well as teleportation devices able to transport asteroids and other material inside ships, destroying them from the inside out. So the Necrons have some astonishingly powerful technology. It's a weapon of the living metal undead who have literally destroyed gods and shackled them to their whim, who are capable of destroying entire solar systems seemingly at their will. So an Ionic Orb is...
Yeah, imagine that, dude. Imagine being able to sit there and say, why should I fear you? I have conquered gods and shackled them to my will. Like, what can you really say against that?
Capable of destroying entire solar systems seemingly at their will. So an Ionic Orb is well within the reasonable grasp of their technology, plus their rarity means that based on how I interpret 40k lore, it could be a real thing, or it could just be a mythical thing misinterpreted by the few surviving guardsmen of a truly apocalyptic battle on some distant planet, passed down through word of mouth and has become muddled and exaggerated over time, so who can really say? So consider how powerful much of Necron technology is before writing off the Ionic Orb. I guess the last thing I'll say is quite simply, is the Ionic Orb real or not? That all depends on if you trust the drunken late night reminiscent ramblings of Sergeant Tough Bastard of the Imperial 183rd, or any other random unstable individuals who are rambling and talking to themselves, somehow able to have survived and just may or may not have witnessed an Ionic Orb in action.
Okay, so now we're getting into the orcs. This is stuff that I'm interested in. Orc attack moons. So is this a situation where they've literally converted, like they've gone Death Star, where they've literally made entire moon-sized vessels of destruction? I don't know. I really don't know much about the orcs, but I find it hilarious that their technology works because they just believe it works, and it does. I find that hilarious.
Orcs are often wildly underestimated for the danger they present to the galaxy and to the Imperium, and orcs when left unchecked can quickly rise to becoming unstoppable. Once they gain momentum in a warg, it can take massive resources to prevent them from ravaging entire systems like a plague of insects. It's worth remembering that at one point they stood on the cusp of destroying the Imperium in what was known as the War of the Beast in the middle of M32, and this was a costly and devastating campaign that in some ways was worse than that of the Heresy. This time was one of the first instances the Imperium would experience what are known as Orc attack moons. During another battle against the Xenos, who are known as the Chromes, Astartes here were noticing a lot of strange gravity changes and disturbing geological events, and as reinforcements were sent to assist, they soon realised that the cause of these disturbances were in fact a strange Orc planetoid that had appeared in orbit around the world, and quickly they would engage and destroy much of the reinforcing Imperials that were there. Stranger though still was it appeared to be phasing in and out of material space. As it became more stable, hordes of orcs began to appear, slaughtering whatever was left of the Imperials, and a broken message was sent out to the Imperium that it was facing a threat the likes of which it had never seen before. It's worth noting that at the end of this battle, the majority of the Imperial 5th chapter had been exterminated by these events. It soon became clear that what were being now designated as Orc attack moons were being more commonly seen. They left devastation wherever they appeared and deployed massive waves of orcs upon planets that they came into the orbit of. The situation became worse and worse, and billions perished. The story of the War of the Beast is long and contains many other interesting incidents like the Proletarian Crusade that I have mentioned previously. It also involves the reappearance and subsequent last appearance of the Primarch Vulcan of the Salamanders. He is assumed by many to be dead, but given he is a perpetual, the Salamanders still hunt for him to this day. But what about these attack moons? Well, they were devastating weapons seen only in the most frenzied and sprawling of orc wargs. They are basically battle planetoids, extremely powerful in both armament and capability. The orcs you should know are the strange creation of the ancient race known as the Old Ones, and like many races in the galaxy that are suspected to originate from the Old Ones' planetary seeding, they have curious instinctive abilities when it comes to technology. So orcs are capable of simply hammering different tech together, and somehow it just miraculously works. This can extend to them constructing machines that even defy the laws of physics, but simply because of their enthusiasm, orcs can seemingly will things to work.
I just find that hilarious, man. I just find that hilarious. I think it's one of the funniest things ever. How does it work? I believe it works, therefore it does. It doesn't matter how it works.
In some respects, these traits bear something of a similarity to the race known as the Jakaro. But whereas the Jakaro tend to kind of just improve existing things, orcs will in fact construct titans from scrap, which by all visual appearance should simply fall apart, yet often they are equally as tough as their Mechanicus Titanic counterparts. Orcs will often attack worlds by landing in what are known as rocks, and they are called rocks because they're basically big rocks or asteroids that orc mech boys have hollowed out and then fitted with plasma engines and all manner of other bashed together tech, likely just whatever was available. However, orc rocks are usually not capable of warp travel, and they just drift around, and then when they're near enough to a world, they'll fire up their engines and smash into a planet, causing massive damage and then unleashing hordes of orcs into a world, likely that they will then never be rid of them. Attack moons, in a simpler sense, are basically scaled up rocks. This is not dissimilar to a lot of orc tech. They often will find something small kind of works, and then they simply scale it up bigger and bigger. Yeah. Because if it works well already, then it's going to work well when it's bigger. And quite honestly, most of the time, this isn't actually too far away.
And I think I find that hilarious about the orcs too, is like everything is just make it bigger, bigger, better.
Then it's going to work well when it's bigger. And quite honestly, most of the time, this isn't actually too far away from what other races do with their tech too, including humanity and the Imperium. So one of the primary things that's different about orc attack moons is that they're capable of FTL travel. This is why they appear to often phase in and out of material space. But unlike most FTL, they're not using the warp. The orcs somehow create what the Mechanicus believe to be a subspace corridor, a dimensional space in between
They have like Star Trek warp technology, man. They don't even have to go through the warp or the webway. They have their own FTL. And I would assume it's a situation where they're just like, faster than light, it work, bah, and it does. That's hilarious, dude.
In the warp and real space, and we could speculate they're using whatever dimensional space the Eldar webway is contained within,
Okay,
considering that this was
webway.
created in and around the time of the Old Ones, and given the Orcs' believed origins also have the connection. This travel seems typically Orky in nature, in that it is not exactly smooth, and there is this strange period of phasing in and out of real space accompanied by these very powerful gravity forces that will affect nearby planets. However, this is no negative for the Orcs. If anything, it's beneficial, as it will often cause geological and environmental chaos on a planet, meaning that by the time the Orcs are ready to invade the world, it's far less likely to be prepared, if not already in a state of total disruption.
Yeah.
But aside from these huge problems created for a planet by simply phasing in and out of real space so close to it that it destroys the balance of a world, causing apocalyptic environmental disruption, they also boast other terrifying weapons. Powerful beam emitters that can tear a planet apart, as well as void shielding, apparently more powerful than even Imperial battleships. Their most feared weapon, though, is the legendary gravitic whip. This was described as being a gravity weapon that appeared visually as a green snake-like whip of energy surrounding an attack moon that would strike against any target the Orcs focused on, and the power unleashed was so great it would near enough shear anything in two as instantly as the gravity lash hit, or that it would then wrap around it so that the seismic crushing power would just shred whatever object it had caught upon. It's believed that this power came from the mass of Orc energy buried somewhere within its hollowed centre, likely a scaled-up version of the same mysterious energies that power Orc Titanic battle mechs. The gravity whip is extremely feared by the Imperial fleet commanders, as they have little to no defence against its power.
I would assume so,
Entire battle fleets could near enough be destroyed with one pass from the gravity whip, tearing them apart like matchsticks. The only
I would think that would honestly be one of the things that would be so hard to defend against the Orcs, is they don't even know how their technology works, so how could you really study it and understand how it works to defend yourselves, you know? Any kind of Orc capture technology, I would think, would be very hard to kind of, you know, reverse engineer or break down in a way to figure out some kind of defense, or even use it, you know, to enhance your own weapons of some sort.
Destroyed with one pass from the gravity whip, tearing them apart like matchsticks. The only saving grace was the high amount of power needed to activate the fearsome weapon, and this gave Imperial commanders some room for manoeuvre and planned engagements in between its assaults. Attack moons themselves are not exactly vessels in the sense of them moving like ships. They're more like entry-exit points for the Orcs to travel through this subspace realm, I suppose similarly to the Necron's Dolmen gates. But the major difference is that they're not just a gateway. When they arrive, there's something more akin to a battle station that can deploy then hordes of Orcs to a planet's surface, and this is why they're often referred to by the Orc as a warg gate.
Yeah, it sounds like they're just like giant carrier, you know, moons almost, that just deploy whole, you know, planets worth of Orcs to just go and wipe things out.
These same gravitic powers used to create the original attack moons, Orc are able to transport also large sections of conquered planets up to the attack moon, thereby growing it in size and structure. This process uncovered the fact that these attack moons were somewhat akin to a prototype for the Orc known as the Beast, to launch a perfected much larger attack planetoid, using in fact the world of Ullanor Prime itself as one gigantic battle station. And the Orcs had planned to in fact destroy Terra itself with this. Thankfully, as noted under the leadership of Vulcan, this was prevented, and the Orc known as the Beast was slain. However, the Mechanicus would actually study and transport the world of Ullanor Prime to a new location, and although it is unknown to the Imperium commonly, this world would later become known as the fabled Imperial planet of Armageddon.
Interesting. Exterminatus. We've kind of got, you know, into this a little bit before, but, you know, when a world is deemed unsalvageable for whatever reason, you know, Inquisitors can, you know, deem it exterminatus, so I would assume we're going to get into the ways of how that gets carried out.
Now, I debated including exterminatus because It's such an extremely obvious choice. However, the prospect of having years of comments saying why no Exterminatus was too much for me to mentally cope with. So Exterminatus is, as the name suggests, an order requiring the complete eradication of all life on a planet to reduce perhaps once vibrant places of culture, construction, life and beauty to barren, wasted rock. It's certainly no small thing and will not be enacted without usually a very good reason. Exterminatus has been used to cleanse planets rightfully owned by mankind in the face of unrecoverable and planet-wide heresy, mutation or disease that has spread like a wildfire past the point of return to stop warp rifts opening or when they have already become too severe. It is also deployed when Xenos are so entrenched into a planet that it is considered too costly to recover. This is usually not especially common because the disposable manpower the Imperium has available is usually more than enough to recover a world. However, if a planet had little importance, it may be easier to Exterminatus a planet than allow an enemy to use a lost world as a springboard to other worlds in a system. Exterminatus will also be used to obliterate worlds which are lost in other ways. For example, during the period known as the Great Scouring, after the Horus Heresy, where loyalist forces of the Imperium sought to scour the galaxy of traitors and heretics, many worlds of former Astartes legions were subject to Exterminatus to purge the memory of them, erase all trace of them ever having existed forevermore. Not to mention the fact that after the heresy, many worlds were entirely consumed by corruption, as I've discussed a lot recently, and any attempt to recover them would have been impossible if just not prohibitively costly at the time when severe damage had already been dealt to the forces of the Emperor. In essence, they were written off and just destroyed. There are several core methods by which the Imperium will deliver Exterminatus to a world. The most standard is orbital bombardment, and this is where Imperial warships will deploy heavy bombardment upon a planet until it is all but a barren wasteland devoid of any population or biological matter. It is also a fairly vague term and could apply to things like atmospheric incineration as well, or dropping many thermonuclear missiles upon a planet with obvious consequences. One of the more dramatic and well-known methods is the aforementioned atmospheric incineration. This is the visually devastating method of Exterminatus, as well as being an incredibly fast method of annihilating a world.
I would assume
a device
so,
deploying nucleonic fire, raw plasma, or a bomb of extreme radioactivity is dropped to scour the surface of a world. Whichever of these are deployed, they will be of a scale so powerful that surface rock may be melted into a liquid state, organic matter be completely obliterated, vaporized, or just breaks down into radioactive sludge. Usually this is then accompanied by an atmospheric burn-off, leaving ultimately no living matter on the world. Some worlds may have below ground facilities or Xenos threats there, and this is where a two-stage system will be deployed to eradicate both the surface and below ground elements of life. Sometimes these torpedoes can be so powerful that the shockwave can in fact destabilize a planet and break it apart. One of the other most well-known Exterminatus tools is virus bombing. Virus bombs unleash what is known as the Life Eater.
Horus used this, I believe, during the heresy to destroy some of the loyalist legions or whatever that weren't going to betray the Emperor.
Tools is virus bombing. Virus bombs unleash what is known as the Life Eater virus, and this will spread across the world extremely.
That just sounds awful. The Life Eater virus, like, sounds terrible.
Extremely quickly, destroying all organic cellular structures it encounters. Virus bombs will envelop a world, reducing all organic matter to a thick sludge and gaseous state before an inevitable firestorm is triggered by the Imperial forces in orbit, again burning out the atmosphere of a planet. And while devastating, virus bombs are not a method of Exterminatus guaranteed to deliver 100% extermination. Any individuals sealed in high-grade enough underground bunkers or sealed environmental facilities may be protected and able to survive the virus.
That's what I was gonna say. It sounds like some of the methods they talk about here, like just regular orbital bombardment or whatever, some of these methods sound like if they're deep enough underground and secure enough bunkers, some, people could survive. So I would think they would also probably have some kind of like planet cracking technology where they're able to like destroy the actual core of the planet and just break it apart. I would assume, perhaps not.
sealed environmental facilities may be protected and able to survive the virus. And once the atmosphere has been burned off by the orbiting ships, the planet will be devoid of life. It would be safe for survivors then to emerge, except of course that the planet will usually no longer then have an atmosphere,
right.
So they would need some suits to survive still. The most horrific and perhaps primary reason why virus bomb exterminators are deployed is primarily their speed. The virus bomb's virus, when unleashed, can envelop a planet and wipe out the entire population of billions in mere minutes.
Really? That's
is one
insane.
of the most extreme and powerful tools used by the Imperium of Mankind, and it stands as a testament to humanity's resolve and unwavering determination to eradicate any threat to its security and power. Exterminatus will never be deployed lightly despite the rumours that have characterised it, and where it has been misused, the penalties are usually severe. Yet humanity and the Imperium will never flinch, never hesitate to deploy their ultimate weapon where necessary. It is the last line of defence against the Xenos and the darkness, and as regrettable as it may be, few ordinary citizens within the Imperium are likely even aware of the existence of Exterminatus. But even if they did, they would surely understand it to be a necessary sacrifice in order to safeguard the wider Imperium and human civilization.
Spirit of mankind.
And then as my...
Is this supposed to be kind of a counter to the chaos corruption? Because I don't know if this is like considered an actual thing or what, but I've never heard of the spirit of mankind so far, so I don't know if he's like talking about the literal spirit and faith and unwavering will that mankind has in the Emperor and the Emperor's cause and the betterment of humanity, whatever, the imperial message, whatever it's called, I can't think of it off the top of my head, or if this is an actual, like, weapon of some sort. I'm curious to know.
Final choice in this episode, we have the spirit of mankind. Now, I know, I can hear already everybody screaming, the spirit of man, Luton. Boo. Okay, fine. I can appreciate on the face of it, this seems like a weird non-choice. How can the spirit of man be a weapon? Or be insane, for that matter? Well, listen on and I'll tell you. Firstly, when I say consider the spirit of man to be one of, if not the most powerful weapons held by humanity, because it is this spirit which enables many of those insane things that happen within the Imperium, both against its enemies but also against itself, and that without this indomitable spirit of man, I would say it were debatable as to whether the Imperium could function well or if in fact at all.
Because, I mean, the conditions that a lot of people have to live through in the 40K universe in order for humanity to survive, and the sacrifices that people have to give in order for humanity to survive and to continue in the current state of the 40K universe is great. So the willpower to want to endure and to live and to continue on would have to be virtually unbreakable, which I think that also kind of goes into the idea of, you know, the faith of mankind in the Emperor and his message and will and way with everything that's happening with him. The theory that he's going to coalesce as a new god in the warp is a very interesting one, and one that I could see possibly happening. I think it would be an interesting irony. I've said this before in one of my other videos. How ironic is that if were that to happen, humanity's faith and belief in the Emperor and his message and his will, you know, could be so powerful that it could, you know, strengthen and coalesce the spirit into the warp and could create a new chaos god, if you will, or rebirth him as a new god in the warp. So, and then who knows what repercussions that would have, but it would be very interesting if that's the case. And I could see what he's talking about with the spirit of mankind. You know, he ended the last video with the chaos corruption and how it affects, you know, humanity, and I feel like this is kind of the opposite of that, and how, you know, the will of mankind through all the trials and harsh things that and sacrifices that, you know, humanity's had to give in order to stay alive, that their will and their faith is what's keeping everything going. So
I should say that of course within philosophy and religion there can be many different interpretations of what we might mean when talking about the human spirit. It can be seen as a tangibly positive or far more ambiguous thing. Either way, I'm no philosopher, but really what I'm thinking about when talking about the human spirit or the spirit of mankind is not some invisible element that makes us all individual or some ethereal sense of our personal selves, also our unique elements. I'm talking about the spirit of humanity as being far more impersonal and universal, a collective indestructible sense of determination which encompasses all. Essentially, the spirit of mankind being a binding force that is renewed and forever embedded by simple daily actions, be it imperial dogma of a religious nature or just plain devotion to the Imperium, as well as associated visual stimuli which surround citizens of the Imperium everywhere. Now this sense of spirit is powerful in one person, but in a large fighting force it can grow within them, and it is this spirit that enables a human to go through literal hell whilst retaining the unbreakable belief that they know they themselves carry, not only the strength of the God Emperor within them, but that they may well be only one small individual, but serve a greater purpose in humanity in defense of the Imperium of mankind. In some respects, you may even liken this collective driving force to be not again entirely dissimilar to traits of the orcs, and it is much more than simply determination or a sense of duty. Those may be how people might frame it to themselves, but
and I think that's kind of human nature in general. Humanity seems to always strive to look for being part of something greater than themselves. I feel like, I just think that's in general part of human history, is just wanting to create and be a part of just something greater than yourself. That's why, there's so many various religions and faiths of different kinds and beliefs, and it's not only necessarily a religious thing, but it's also, you could talk about cultural things and beliefs and et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things, but I just feel like humans in general want to be a part of something greater and believe potentially in something greater, and it doesn't even have to again be a religious thing like science. You could technically look in a manner of speaking, you could look at science as its own kind of religion. The I don't know how I'm trying to phrase it, but just the pursuit of knowledge and wanting to learn and know more about the world and the universe around us, and the unwavering curiosity that we have to learn more, that, you could look at that as a form of religion almost, if you wanted to. So,
but deeper down, it is this spirit of humanity that all within the Imperium feel compelled to do whatever is necessary for the whole. It is this sense of spirit which also goes toward the core of 40k, that the Imperium is a bleak and dark parody. The clothes are everywhere. For example, at the beginning of many source material books, for decades now it states on page 1, quote, "To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable." Goes on to state that this is a dark and terrible era where you will find little comfort or hope, forget the power of technology and science, forget the promise of progress and advancement, forget any notion of common humanity or compassion. Now, the complete long statement to which that quote is a part of should never be removed from the first pages of the source books, because it is this which reflects what the Imperium truly is. Not the appalling horror seen in its wars, and not the nightmarish actions of its Inquisition or horrifying apathy of its bureaucratic administration. The Imperium as it stands is in many ways showcasing the worst of humanity, but also some of its best attributes.
Right.
The darkest part lies in the fact that it need not actually be so. The Imperium in the 41st millennium had decayed so greatly as an empire that until very recently it could see no forward light, and was only being kept functional by unrelenting and punishing brutality coupled with a vast anonymous bureaucracy. Now, if you were to look around the galaxy of the Imperium, it's true that you will find some areas which are not as brutal and harrowing as others. In fact, some systems are actually fairly stable and even enable citizens to live a degree of normality. Now what this illustrates for us is the tragic parody that is the Imperium of mankind. In fact, this hopefully is a message that many people should have long realised, that when we talk about the bureaucracy and the horror within the Imperium, these sound very vague and impersonal, but that the underlying inescapable fact is that it is humanity that makes things in the Imperium so bad for itself. Betrayal, greed, vengeance, fear, ignorance, and many other of our worst attributes. And when combined with all the other events of the thousands of years before and after the heresy, it is humanity that has in many ways destroyed itself time and time again. This is perhaps why the AI from the Dark Age of technology, when they encounter humanity, absolutely despair, because they have just seen the horror which we unfold upon ourselves. Yet somehow we never manage to destroy ourselves completely. There is always this sense of resistance and human spirit that cannot be extinguished even amid all the horror, which leaves us grappling and dragging and hanging on by our fingernails. And this is the ongoing theme within 40k. But also, if for example you look at Chaos and the Warp is a very literal reflection of the worst aspects of humanity. And this explanation of the warp is hardly subtle. In fact, it's glaringly obvious that humanity's greatest enemy in the galaxy, above all the Xenos threats, is in fact itself. Within the
its own fear of the unknown. Yeah.
Overall narrative of 40k, it's certainly no accident that within the warp, the darkest parts of human psyche are given form and power to reach out and trigger a self-perpetuating downward spiral. The message is built in alphabet bricks, that humanity is its own worst enemy, and it continually undermines its own positive steps forward. Hardly a groundbreaking realization, but it seemed important to note. Now, as you will hopefully have realised, I appreciate the madness and absurdity of 40k. I love it. But I also like to take 40k fairly seriously, and I approach a lot of things with a more literal interpretation. And this is because I enjoy thinking about it in those terms. I like thinking about the human condition and futurist rationalizations, and also of course just the narrative. Now, I'll freely admit that sometimes I like to overthink things and make them more complicated than they really are, but generally, when it comes to 40k and the Imperium, if we take just a small step back and see things from a broader perspective.
Someone just subscribed, so thank you very much to who just subbed to my YouTube channel. Appreciate you during the middle of this recording. I apologize for that audio popping up. I have the alerts turned off, but somehow I still hear it. So there we go. Thank you very much for the sub. Appreciate you.
The overall message about humanity working against itself and how
Hang on, let me back up for a second.
They really are, but generally, when it comes to 40k and the Imperium, if we take just a small step back and see things from a broader perspective, the overall message about humanity working against itself and how farcical that is are very easy to see. Anyway, this might have sounded like I'm going wildly off topic here, but I'm not. The point that I was trying to illustrate is that it's not the Imperium as some faceless organisation which creates humanity's bleak and harrowing reality, but that it is the nature of humanity which has created the unending hellscape that is the Imperium, and this is largely enabled by what I consider to be the spirit of humanity. So how exactly then does this...
I mean, that's the irony of 40k in general. There's a lot of things that are very ironic in the 40k universe. Again, as he said, humanity is its own worst enemy. There's a lot of things that humanity could do to turn things around. The idea of, you know, technology being heresy, and it's understandable the care they would want to take in relearning and exploring lost technologies, because they involve AI that could be corrupted in certain ways and that would want to destroy humanity. And humanity, for as strong as it is still very fragile, and you know, that could easily, there's a number of little things in the 40k universe that could happen, and humanity could be thrown even further back, you know, in regressing time. You know, another age of strife could happen. They could have another situation where the warp becomes so turbulent that warp travel can't happen, and all the worlds of the Imperium are cut off from each other again. Another AI uprising could happen. A massive chaos incursion could happen that can't be stemmed or stopped, and you know, they can't do exterminatus on the planet, and you know, billions and trillions of demons are just flooding out into the universe and going from planet to planet and wiping things out. Or Terra, you know, the Emperor could actually finally die. You know, it could become a situation where the spirits that they're feeding him stop having as great of an effect, and his body finally gives out, and now again warp travel can't be possible, and Terra itself could be flooded with chaos demons, and then the seat of power of humanity is gone. And you know, there's any number of little things, but you know, it's also the idea of following this religious doctrine that is keeping humanity together, but it's also holding humanity back, you know? And it's just, I find a lot of the ironies in the 40K universe very interesting.
Human spirit benefit mankind. It doesn't sound good at all. In fact, it sounds pretty bad. Well, certainly from one perspective that's fair to say, except for one thing, and this is debatable, but many believe the Imperium is the only organizational structure capable of defending and ruling over humanity, given the current threats and the predicaments it finds itself in. Not to mention, of course, the fact that the Emperor himself has become the god of mankind for the majority of humans, and so any other system is just unthinkable by default. So despite its faceless and appalling lack of empathy, the Imperium requires cooperation from humanity in order to function on a day-to-day level.
Right, if enough people actually stood up and said, no, we don't want to do this, we want another way of being, you know, and another massive civil war happened, led by, you know, again, could be happening Primarchs against Primarchs or whatever, it might not necessarily be considered, I guess it would be considered heresy to some, but others wouldn't necessarily see it heresy. You know, Gilliman could all of a sudden be like, you know what, I know the Emperor didn't want to be worshipped as a god, I know this religious doctrine isn't the way he wanted things to go. This isn't the Emperor's truth. We're going to change things starting right now and raise up legions of armies of Astartes and whoever else and start a civil war to get rid of the religious doctrine and whatnot. Like, you know, who knows where that would go and what changes that would have. And obviously it could happen, you know, but yeah, it's just ironic. Again, just the ironies in 40K are very interesting to me.
As well as for its combat operations. And it may be a tragic and appalling situation, but it is this collective spirit of humanity which in part enables the Imperium to function and therefore has to a degree safeguarded human civilization for many thousands of years. Plus some superhuman genetically adapted warriors or something, but don't worry about those guys. Yeah, the Imperium uses this impersonal but collective spirit which exists within all humans and further instills its citizens with the suffocating ideological perspectives of the Imperium of Man, as well as its other subsidiary organisations like the Ecclesiarchy, who continually and aggressively demand absolute devotion to the God Emperor. And this has formed, for all practical purposes, a near enough unbreakable belief within ordinary humans that their required actions are at the behest of what is basically an all-powerful god who watches over them. Also worth noting that compounding these views are the miraculous events and feats of legend which continue to occur within the Imperium. Additionally, given what we know of the emergence of psychers and the power of faith within the Imperium, it is questionable if you could relate on an even footing humans of the 41st millennium to those in our current age, even in simple terms of what it means to be a human and what stage of development they are at. And this is really a whole other topic, but to make it a simple aside, what I'm thinking about here is my belief that humans in the time of the Imperium are in some respects more advanced and developed than we are now. In others, they are horribly regressive. Yeah. And that's all before we talk about their slowly emerging psychic powers. Human development.
You know, there's so many ways that in the 40K universe they're ahead of our time with technology and space travel and certain understandings. And then obviously there's it's that mix of it's literally they've taken the dark age, you know, the dark ages that we actually had, and just putting it in the future with sci-fi. It's literally what it is. So again, that irony of the future, you could have all these advancements in technologies and cybernetic implants and genetic augmentations that could advance you and make you so great, and technologies that can get rid of diseases and, you know, all kinds of things that have solved a lot of, you know, humanity's problems of today. But there's also all these religious doctrines and beliefs, and you could be killed for, you know, saying the wrong thing because it's not what the...
I'm looking for Ray Finkel. And a clean pair of shorts.
And a clean pair of shorts. It's not what the populace... That's not what the popular opinion is. Thank you very much again for the sub. I don't know, again, I apologize. I don't know, again, why these alerts are popping up when I have them turned off. As you can see, there's no text or any pop-ups coming up on screen, but somehow the audio is still coming through as I'm recording. So I'll have to figure that out. But thank you again very much for the sub, for subbing to me on the YouTube channel. Appreciate it very, very much. Thank you. So yeah, let's continue.
Development in the Age of the Imperium is one other factor that I consider in making this sense of human spirit such a powerful thing. Another aspect is that when it comes to miraculous events, these will rarely be questioned or doubted. The vast majority of citizens are going to receive information about almost anything rarely at a first-hand level, and certainly not in a visual format. It will more likely be passed on to them through dictated dogma and likely word of mouth. Perhaps they'll...
And that again kind of goes back to how things were way back in the day, where the basic Joe Schmo guy didn't have an education, really didn't know how to read or write, didn't know really the actual goings on in the world. It was only those people in positions of power that actually like had an education, could write and really, you know, understand things and knew how the world really worked, while the masses were being controlled by various doctrine, religious, political, or otherwise, you know. So it's very much the dark ages of humanity, but just set in this technological sci-fi future in the universe, you know, with aliens. And I just, I find it very fascinating, and I find the ironies very interesting.
Have some very limited printed word, or on advanced worlds maybe display screens throughout a hive city, but most people are going to live dirty, hard, monotonous lives. So when they may catch a glimpse or story that helps illustrate to them the fleeting remains of glory within the Imperium, it must seem inspirational and spiritually uplifting for many ordinary citizens. So no wonder that they have such entrenched beliefs in the spiritual nature of things. And there have of course been numerous incidents where human guardsmen survived encounters that no mortal should have been capable of, or who held their nerve and strength of will beyond that of even an Astartes, who for whatever reason have in fact shown themselves to be not nearly as unbreakable as we would so often be led to believe, whereas regular guardsmen time and time again demonstrate a sense of human spirit and character that demonstrates this unbreakable grit and determination. And how is this possible? How can such fragile mortal citizens become so dedicated, so determined and mentally unbreakable? Well, one might equally answer, how does an ordinary human become an Astartes, a Grey Knight, or a member of the Inquisition? And this is what I've been driving to get to. The Imperium's military forces are all that stands between humanity and complete extermination. And how were we able to create those that are able to endure and have such willpower even before the Imperium really existed? Physical strength will only ever carry you so far. It's well known that much human endurance is achieved in the mind, and this is no different for those who serve the Imperium or aspire to join the ranks of its most powerful warriors. It is the human spirit that enables this, and to my mind, this is how the spirit of humanity is both something that can be quite insane and also one of our most powerful weapons. Now, I've often considered how some, and I want to emphasize only some, Astartes with their near immortal nature, even knowing they're destined to die in battle, can develop something akin to a fear of their inevitable end, and this may be where you see some turn to becoming renegade marines. Yet Astartes who lead near enough immortal lives comparative to those ordinary humans who live and breathe their mortal nature, who understand their time is fleeting, but know collectively the human spirit endures, that even when they leave, something remains which cannot be extinguished as a part of the whole. Human citizens of the Imperium are seemingly more accepting of their mortality than perhaps Astartes, who we also know can be prone via their ascension to become somewhat detached from their humanity and even their view of ordinary humans. Some chapters of Astartes will be very considerate and protective of ordinary humans, but others may actually become apathetic to a point where they are actually walking a very fine line between treachery and loyalty. Despite all of the factional infighting and devastation,
which again is another irony, being that they were created to be the bulwarks, the shields of humanity, to go out and fight and win the great wars so that normal average humans could live and be prosperous and have good lives. Again, just the ironies of 40K.
devastating problems that the Imperium continues to bear, this sense of human spirit remains a defining characteristic of humanity, ever present yet also intangible, something that cultivates a sense of necessary sacrifice essential for the Imperium to function, a strength and understanding that drives forward humanity with unrelenting determination, even when its forces face the most forlorn of battles upon those ruined worlds that are little more than ashen wastes. Yet for as much as it can be a powerful positive, it also enables some of the worst aspects of humanity, especially within the Imperium. The scale of losses and the insane disregard for human life only made possible because of the enduring spirit and loyalty. It is one of humanity's most passive traits, but also one which allows the forces of mankind to be so proactively aggressive that it has embedded this sense of necessary sacrifice in its culture. All Imperial citizens know that mankind can never be completely defeated, that no matter the odds or the enemy, they know to their core humanity shall always rise above, break free from, and ultimately destroy its enemies. Should it require 100,000, 10 million, 100 million, 10 billion human lives, so be it. The Imperium of Mankind and the Emperor cannot be defeated, they cannot fall, or all will be lost. The Imperium...
You know, and I wonder, as he's saying that, you know, it just got me thinking, I wonder if... Because it's supposed to be the old ones created humanity, right? And I wonder if that was kind of a secret backup plan as a revenge against some of the other creations of the Catan and whatnot, that humanity, this driving, undefeatable spirit of humanity was imbued to them as part of the creation, and humanity was again another race made as a weapon to defeat the old one's enemies. You know, I don't know if that's the case or not, or if humanity was just seeded, you know, as another race, you know, given life by the old ones, and, you know, through whatever evolution and trials and everything that humanity's been through, this is just the spirit of mankind just is endured, and this is what it's evolved to. You know what I mean?
Wields powerful, world-ending weaponry, has achieved superhuman genetic advances, deploys titanic machines of war that shake the ground like an earthquake, and fire weapons that can break planets themselves. Yet above it all sits one of the most powerful weapons for humanity in the galaxy of the 41st millennium, the indomitable spirit of mankind. It is simply the greatest tragedy that most citizens within the Imperium are seemingly unable to realize that this spirit can be used in other ways to drag themselves out from the horror and build a more constructive way forward with less internal suffering, but retaining all the strengths and benefits of the Imperium structure, and that perhaps this had in fact been the Emperor's original intentions before everything became mired in darkness and mythology, to a point where now humanity has drifted so far backward into stagnant ignorance that its empire can only be enforced through harrowing brutality. With that said, it's equally possible that without the human spirit enabling its determination and unity, it's unlikely that the Imperium will be capable of wielding its armies in the hundreds of millions who march relentlessly to their deaths, knowing they do what simply must be done for the greater glory and survival of humanity, and most importantly, in the service of the Holy Emperor and the Imperium of Mankind.
The understanding and acceptance that you're just a cog in a greater wheel, and that you're doing your duty and purpose for the greater good of your species and the idea of humanity and what it could be. I mean, it could be very powerful, you know, and growing up in a life indoctrinated by that, you know, that's all people know and probably have known for thousands, if not, you know, close to 10,000 plus years. So it's understandable.
There is perhaps no better example than that of Cadia and the unbreakable will of the Astra Militarum. The dark forces of chaos may have had their technical victory, but despite literally breaking apart the planet of Cadia, they could not break the spirit of mankind.
There are no miracles, there is only mankind. That's a sick-ass quote! I mean, that's talk about, you know, a quote that's about taking your power into your own hands. There are no miracles. There are no gods out there to create the miracles for you. It's only the will of mankind that sustains us and moves things forward and make things happen. It's dope.
So now I just want to talk briefly about Audible and why I think it is an excellent service for you to use. Many of you guys continue to tell me that you use this service and why it is so good, and I've included your comments as I always do here on the screen so you can see for yourself why it is a great service. You can start today with a 30-day Audible trial, 1 free audiobook and unlimited monthly.
I do want to have the actual physical books as like a collection thing, because I do like collecting stuff, but this might be something that I end up doing just because it'll be a lot quicker for me to catch up. I do still want to read the books, but I might end up using some of these audible things to get through some of these books and to be able to get some more content after you guys, my own content after you guys quicker, you know, talking about these things and giving my ideas, thoughts, and reactions, and, you know, whatever else, talking about the lore of the universe, you know, with this stuff. So definitely, if this offer is still going, because this video I think is somewhat old, but if this offer's still going, you know, go over there and check it out and use it.
The Audible originals, just be sure please to use my link above, audible.com/Luton, or for those of you in the US, text Luton to 500 500. So far I have been recommending singular titles for you to choose from on Audible, but today I'm suggesting you listen to the 5 audiobooks in the Siege of Terror series. Now, as I've said before, I personally feel that you can start anywhere when it comes to 40k, so whether this is your first step into the world of Warhammer and the Heresy, or you have simply not yet had a chance to hear about the final days of the Heresy, this is a great series that I have finished recently and greatly enjoyed. The Siege of Terror is the culmination of the Horus Heresy series and fleshes out this final confrontation leading up to the Battle of Terror itself. The series also allows us some tantalizing insights via new characters into the background of the Emperor himself, not to mention describing the immense ground battles where billions fight for the very survival of humanity. Beyond this, the characters and events give additional context and even may make you question some fundamental aspects of not simply the reasoning for the heresy, but for myself in some respects it may even make you rethink everything we know about the Imperium, as well as something I've talked about many times before, which is just how much can you trust what you see and hear from those living in the 40k verse. I think the important thing that I want to underscore is that this series is best viewed as just that, a series. Individually, some are perhaps not as strong as another, dependent on your preferences. There are those which are more battle heavy, but as a whole, they tell a truly epic story about the last and most desperate days, the last stand of humanity against the traitors and heretics. It's a great choice if you're looking for tens of hours of listening, so this is my pick for this audible.com outing. Once you're a member with Audible, you get a credit good for any audiobook regardless of the price, and any unused credits will roll over for your next month. Members will save 30% off regularly priced audiobooks, which gives you a significant saving on any titles that you pick up. Remember, you can start a free 30-day Audible trial today. You can choose one audiobook, you get unlimited downloads. Please just be sure to use the link above, audible.com/Luton. Or again, for those in the US, you can text Luton to 500 500 to get started today. So as always, I'll just say a big thanks to all of you guys for the massive support here on the channel. It's hugely appreciated. Loads more stuff is coming up very, very soon, and I hope you enjoy the free audiobook that you can get from this offer. I'll see you in the next one.
All right. There we go. There we go. That was Luton's 40K's Most Insane and Powerful Weapons Part 2, Warhammer 40,000 Lore and History. Great follow-up video to the first one that we watched. You know, started off with basically stuff that we have today, weapons of mass destruction that we have today, nuclear weapons, chemical, biological, you know, weapons that we use currently. And it just goes to show that even, you know, 40,000 years into the future, that they're still effective and still have a place. It's funny that they don't get used as often during battles because of the bureaucracy and red tape that gets, you know, that they get wrapped up in. But if they, again, it's an irony. If they were to be able to be used as freely and more often, a lot more of the regular guardsmen would be saved and wouldn't have to be killed and potentially wouldn't be corrupted by, you know, whatever. But, you know, they're not. So yeah, you know, it just goes to show that, you know, sometimes you don't necessarily need super duper, you know, new advanced technologies for things to still be effective. What was it called? The Necron Aeonic Orbs. It sounds like it's something that was a potential idea that may have been scrapped by Games Workshop, but it seems the idea is that the Necrons, through the Catan, were able to actually capture stars into these orbs, and through use of the technology, they were able to unleash, solar flares and solar beams to destroy enemies on a mass or smaller scale. The ideas that I had, it sounded like they could capture suns and potentially, use them as like supernova grenades or black hole grenades, because if they're capturing a sun as it's collapsing, they could throw that out there, and again, they could unleash the star collapsing on a planet as it's happening, and black holes forming, bam, or a supernova, and bam, wiped out whole solar systems, fleets, etc. They can kind of do that already with the technology they were talking about in the previous one, where they've got that I forget what it's called, the Celestial Orrery, I think is what it's called, the Necron Celestial Orrery, where they can just see the entire universe, or not the universe, but the entire galaxy in real time, and are able to just destroy planets and stars at will, so they can already kind of do that anyway. But and I liked how he finished the story with kind of the opposite of what he did in the first one. The first one he talked about the chaos corruption and how really that's kind of one of the greatest weapons to fight against, because whole planets can be lost before anyone even knows what's going on, and someone could be corrupt, and it could be days, months, years down the line, maybe even decades before that corruption comes to fruition. The seed could be planted and no one knows about it, and then one day, some guy just starts going insane, gets possessed or whatever, develops a cult, and portals open up and demons start flowing through. And the only way to really deal with it is just to purge it, just to kill things and stop it before it can even happen. And so, a lot of essentially innocent people who are doing their jobs, potentially, guardsmen who are on the front lines fighting demons and held them off and did their job and killed them and survived, they die anyway, because that's just, they got to do it in order to keep chaos from potentially coming in. And I like how the opposite of that is really just the indomitable will of mankind to keep moving forward and striving to, live and be better, I guess. It's like I said as he was going over it, one of the great ironies of the 40K universe, and that's one of the things that I just find so fascinating, is all the various ironies of things. And they have the ability and power to make things and do things better, but they don't, for whatever, for a number of reasons. Like I said, Gilliman, I guess, is the Primarch who's kind of really running things right now. He knows that the Emperor didn't want to be worshipped, didn't want anything to do with any kind of religion or whatever, and he's upset about it, but he kind of can't really do anything about it. His hands are tied because of how indoctrinated it is in humanity, and how, and it's really like, it's a form of control, but it's also a form of, it's a driving force in what's keeping humanity going, essentially. The belief in the Emperor and this greater picture and this greater, brighter future for humanity, and that this is just a dark time and everyone has to do their part and sacrifice for the greater good. That you're like I said, a cog in the greater wheel, and eventually you do your part and you sacrifice, the next generations will have a better, brighter future. And the picture that the Emperor has for humanity will find its place, and we will all have a brighter future. That's powerful stuff. So I just find I like that. I like how it did that kind of juxtaposition of the chaos corruption and the human spirit. But anyway, this is another long video, guys. I appreciate it. If you're all watching the video to the very end, thank you very, very much. I appreciate you guys. Go check out his channel. I'll have the description to I'll have the link to his channel and to this video down below in the description. So if you want to watch this without my commentary and questions and all that kind of stuff, go do so, and go give him a follow, give him a sub. If that Audible deal that he's got going on, you know, from when this video was made, which was made 3 years ago, so probably not, but you can always check if it is, you know, sign up for Audible, get some of his books, and help a brother out, you know, help him out, show him some support. I will definitely do that. Yeah, again, thank you guys for watching the video here to the very end. If you enjoyed this, consider leaving a like and a sub, as some of you already have during the video, and I greatly appreciate that. Greatly appreciate the support. And yeah, no other really big announcements other than, like I said before in one of my other videos, we're going to be doing some community dark tides. So if that interests you, stay tuned. We're going to be doing that next week, December 9th, around like 5 p.m. Eastern is probably where we're going to start that. So look forward to that, and look forward to playing some games with you guys. But for now, hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are and whenever you're watching this, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.